Welcome back to Business 101 online with Professor Joe Lane. We are now into Chapter 20. Chapter 20 is one of my favorite chapters. By the way, you might be noticing here that I am wearing a $20 necktie for this session. Maybe I better go ahead and take it off, but I want to hang on to this $20. We're going to be using it a little bit. This is one of my favorite chapters because this chapter is about money. Chapter 20, Understanding Money and Financial Institutions. Now, you know some stuff about Chapter 20. You probably just don't know quite as much about it as we're going to learn once we finish this chapter. Now, something else you might notice if you've been watching these things, kind of like one after another, I think he's put on a sweater. And that's true. I thought I might do a costume change for you. Next fall, these folks may be watching these, and by the time they watch Chapter 20, we may be having a heavy snow outside, so it would be more fitting maybe then than now. But a little bit of a change just to kind of break the monotony and that type of thing. All right, Chapter 20. This is a fairly short chapter, and it's an easy chapter, but it's an interesting chapter. This chapter has to do with money. And you stop and think, money is our expression of a medium of exchange. When we speak of value in Europe, they speak of the euro. When you speak of value in Mexico, it's the peso. In Japan, I think it's the yen. Or in the United States, it's the dollar. When we speak of things in financial terms, or we talk about the worth, we express it in dollar amounts. That truck is worth 20 camels, 40 horses, 200 bales of hay, and a canary. Well, that's not the way we express value. That truck is worth $25,000. So our expression of money in the United States is done in dollar value terms. So let's talk about money. First of all, what is money? It's what we use as a medium of exchange. I'm looking at the well-prepared, short Chapter 20 handout. Money, anything that people generally accept as payment for goods and services. Okay. And he also throws out in here, what is bartering? Anybody know what bartering is? That's what I just mentioned a moment ago, is, those cows and pigs or horses or whatever for a truck. Wouldn't it be tough if we had to use bartering? What if everything was bought and sold in America was done with a bartering system? I don't think it would work. So you have to have a medium of exchange, something of value. And what we use as a medium of exchange is the dollar, currency. Let me digress for just a moment. What makes this valuable? I mean, I've got a truck, and if you had a lot of cash money, I decided I wanted to sell my truck to you, I would say, okay, I want $30,000 for my truck. And so you say, okay, and you peel off and you hand me $30,000. And I put $30,000 in my hand. And you get the keys to the truck and you drive off. And all I've got is some paper in my hand. I just got some pieces of paper. I can't drive it, I can't eat it, I can't do anything with it. So this pieces of paper, if I've got $30,000 worth and that's the value of my truck, these pieces of paper better equal the value of that truck. See what I'm saying? So I think something we need to talk about real quick is what gives money value? Why will we take paper and let somebody take our truck from us? All right. Well, I love to do this when everybody is in class because I like to kind of play with this for a while, but I mean, we can't exactly do it today. So let me just go ahead and talk a little bit. Drum roll. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. What gives money its value? Somebody might say gold and silver. Well, you'd be right a few years ago, well, a lot of years ago. Used to, we were on what was called the gold standard, which meant you could actually take paper money and theoretically you could exchange it for a like amount of gold and silver. So what made our money valuable was it was backed up by precious metals. And that's not true anymore. What makes our money valuable? The good faith, credit, military, and financial strength of what? The USA. Our government is what makes this money of value. Our economy is what makes this money valuable. America is what makes this money valuable. We talked in chapter 2 a little about money and that sort of thing indirectly. We talked about we need to keep Mr. Economy healthy, remember? If Mr. Economy went down the tubes, and look, we've said this earlier in this series, our economy right now is plunging downward because of the coronavirus. All right. Our underlying economy was very, very strong before this virus, very strong. Unemployment was at a record low. Investments were at a record high. We had a very strong economy. If we can get this coronavirus, the curve flattened out to the point that we can get people back to work, our economy is going to recover. Excuse me. And I think it's going to recover pretty quickly. Now, some areas of our economy, like cruise liners, maybe airliners, may take a little bit longer than to do that. But I think our economy will come back strong once we get past this stuff. Okay, all right. But the good faith, credit, military, financial strength of the United States and the United States government. We've got to act in good faith. We've got to have ethics. We've got to be credible as a nation. We've got to be financially credible. Okay, credit. We've got a lot of debt, and we're incurring a lot more debt right now. We're going to have to, as soon as we get back to a strong economy, we've got to start working on the debt. Because if you have too much debt, it's like at your household, it can really mess you up. All right? And of course, our financial and military strength. As long as our economy stays strong, returns to its strength, our military strength, our credit worthiness around the world, that we operate in good faith, the dollar remains strong. It'll remain strong not only in the United States, but in comparison to other forms of currency in the world. But sometimes these third world nations, you'll have a dictator come to power, they'll issue money in their name, and all of a sudden they're overthrown and that money's no good. You've got to have stability. Matter of fact, I'll just throw that up there. The stability, good faith, credit, military, and financial strength in the United States government. Stability is very important. Okay, that was just a side note. That was a tangent, but it didn't take too long. Let me put this money here. Anything that people generally accept as payment for goods and services. Now, think about this. Money has to meet certain characteristics, or it's got to have certain criteria. It's almost kind of funny. And so I'm looking at my handout here. Money has to be portable. What if a $20 bill was the size of a beach blanket? Throw that over your shoulder when you go to work. So it's got to be portable. Divisible. All of our money is divisible by something else. I think the largest bill they're printing right now is 100. Can you divide 100 by pennies or nickels or dimes or ones or tens? Yeah. Money has to be divisible. Stable. We've already talked about how important the stability of our money is. Durable. This stuff is pretty durable. I'm not going to destroy it to show you I can, but it's pretty doggone durable. Now, does money ever start wearing out? Does it ever start, kind of getting old and yucky? Well, the answer to that is yes. Where does the old money go? You ever notice you never see much old, ragged money? Here's where the old money goes. It goes to the banks and the credit unions. They're the vacuum cleaners. They suck it up. And then they take that money, they send it to U.S. Treasury. The Treasury then replaces that with new money. So they're kind of the ones who keep our money, you know, new, clean, that sort of thing. And then the last thing, it has to be unique. You can counterfeit this stuff. I'm looking at the lights here, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard. It's hard to counterfeit. So these are just some characteristics that money has to have. I'd like for you to be familiar with what money is, and I'd like for you to be familiar with the characteristics that money has to have. All right, I want to talk about something else as it relates to money. I want to talk about the money supply. We did this a little bit in chapter 2 on the economics chapter. But here's kind of where I'm going with this. We talked about, if you remember in chapter 2, that the way to stay out of a recession, or if you're in a recession, the way to get out of a recession is the buying of goods and services. Because if people are buying goods and services, companies are producing goods and services, and to produce goods and services, they've got to hire people, and they've got to buy goods and services of their own to be able to produce their goods and services. And these people that they're hiring are making money, and they're buying goods and services. You get the idea? Okay. Right now with this coronavirus, we've got tons of people that are out of work. And some of you that are watching this video might be out of work as well. I pray that is short-lived for you. But there's been a $2 trillion stimulus package that has been passed by Congress, signed by the President. Unheard of. But that's $2 trillion. What's the majority of that $2 trillion? Where's it going? To business and industry and people. You know, those checks that people are supposed to be getting, the money to help businesses pay their salaries. What they're basically doing with this $2 trillion, they're putting this money into the economy, giving it to businesses and giving it to people so people and businesses can operate. Businesses can buy stuff, people can buy stuff and businesses can produce stuff. See, it's that tried and true method of putting a great deal of money into the economy, putting a great deal of money into the hands of people so we can buy goods and services. That's the way to help us bridge this gap during this very difficult time, and it's a way to bring our economy back. So money supply is the amount of money that is in the economy, the amount of money that is available to us to spend. Now, the money supply is really, really, really important, because if you don't have well, let's go this way first. If you get too much money into the economy, if you get too much money available, what does that do to the price of goods and services? Think about it. If all of a sudden everybody in America had twice as much money as they have right now in their pocket, in their checkbook, in their billfold, in their savings and checkings accounts, what would that do to the price of goods and services? It would jump it up, way up. Because so many people had so much money, the prices of stuff would go way up. That's called inflation. Okay. Now, the opposite is true. If you have too little money in your economy, that can be deflation. That's not good either. So I just mentioned that right now that our nation's pouring billions of dollars into our economy to pump up our economy, to get our economy back rolling again, to get businesses doing business and getting people having the money to buy and to be able to live. So there's a lot of money being poured into the economy right now, because it's as we've said, that's the way to get business going. That's to either keep us out of a recession or get us out of a recession, however this ends up being. But can you do this forever and ever? I mean, once our economy gets good, do you want to keep throwing that kind of money into the economy? No. You got to hold it back. You got to bring it back so we don't get inflation and prices get out of sight. Okay. All right. So here's something I want you to be familiar with. I want you to be familiar with the money supply. And here's what if I ask you the question, if if money, if how would I say this? If a large amount of too much money is put into the economy, put in the economy for, you know, for our society, if too much money is put in, what happens to the price of goods and services? They go up. If there's not enough money out there for people to have to buy goods and services, what happens? Prices go down. That's what I'd like for you to be familiar with. I'd like for you to be familiar with as the money supply in our economy, in our society increases and decreases, what that does to the price of goods and services. Too much money, prices go up. Too little, prices down. Okay. Now, we're talking about the money supply, and it's important. Now, like I say, it's weird times right now. They're having to do some very unusual things with our economy. But day in and day out, year in and year out, our money supply, even like right now, our money supply has to be controlled. Right now, there's, again, tremendous amounts going out into our economy. But the money supply has to be controlled. So who controls the money supply? Okay. For the most part, we talked way back in chapter 2, we talked about Mr. Fiscal, the Dr. Fiscal Policy and Dr. Monetary Policy. Well, let's talk right now about money supply and who has the primary responsibility day in and day out, month in and month out. It's the Federal Reserve System. Let me show you how they control the money supply. I have it right down here on your handout. Reserve requirements, discount rate, and open market operations. Let's talk about those real briefly as to what those are. Here is a bank. This is a bank. Can the bank take, how does a bank make money? They lend out the money they have. The money they get for deposits and for checking, for receiving, for that sort of thing from customers, they take that money and lend that money out. That's the primary way they make money. Okay, can the bank lend out all the money that it has in the bank? Well, no, they have to keep some back, for safety, for make sure they've got enough money to if customers come in, need funds, that sort of thing. Who determines how much money banks have to keep in their bank, in their vault? So I'm going to make this a vault. You can tell this is a vault because it's a really big, thick wall. So that's a vault, and there's money right inside of it. The reserve requirement, how much banks have to keep in the vault, is determined by the Federal Reserve System. If banks have to keep a lot of money in the vault and they don't have as much money they can lend out to people, that reduces the money supply. Does that make sense? But if banks have to keep less money in the vault, and that means they can lend out more money, that puts more money into the economy and to citizens. Right now, the reserve requirement is very, very, very low, because we're trying to get as much money out to citizens into the economy as possible. The second one is open market. I'll do this one. Open market operations. Do this real quick. The Federal Reserve can buy and sell securities of the federal government. So let's say that, we talked about bonds and everything. Let's say that there's different securities. We did that in chapters 18 and 19. Let's say there's different securities out there, government securities. Those can be called in. Let's say that that's a 20-year bond. Can that bond be called in early? Almost all bonds are what they call callable. They can be called in early as long as you pay the interest rate. So the Federal Reserve, they could, if they wanted to get more money into the market, into the economy, they could call in a lot of securities. Say, we want you to give us these securities, and we're going to give you the money for them plus the interest that they've earned. That would put more money into the economy. Or the Federal Reserve could sell some really good securities. Hey, we got some bonds here at a really good interest rate. Then they would sell you the bond. You would give the government the money. That would take money out of the economy. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's open market operations. The third one is discount rate. What if things are going really good? Banks are doing great. Banks they've lent out all the money they have that they can lend. You always have to keep a little bit in reserve, even though the reserve requirements right now are low. Well, the bank says, hey man, if I had more money, I could lend out more money and make money with it. Well, if a bank needs to make a loan, if a bank needs to borrow money, where do they go? They go to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve says, hey look, we'll lend you some money. How much you need? Man, things are going good here in this area. I need about 15 million. I think I could lend that out pretty quick. So the Federal Reserve says, okay, we'll lend you 15 million. We're going to charge you 10% interest. 10% interest? I can't lend that money out for 10% interest. I can't make that kind of interest. So no thank you, I can't have that money. So you see, if the Federal Reserve, the discount rate is the rate they charge member banks, which is almost all banks in America, to borrow money from them. If they set the discount rate high, banks aren't going to be able to borrow that money. So that means that's less money that's going to go out into the market. So that's a way that they can hold the money supply down. On the contrary, I want some money. I need about $15 million. Federal Reserve, how much are you going to charge me for that? Nothing. Did you say nothing? Yeah. Send it on. I'll take it. I'll take it. The last thing I read, the Federal Reserve System, their discount rate is somewhere between 0.25% and 0. You mean they lend money out to banks for nothing? Yeah. Don't they want to make interest? Not really. What they want to do is get that money to banks so that banks can lend that money out and increase the money supply. Does that make sense? Okay, so real quick and I'm off of it. Reserve requirements. The more money that a bank has to keep in reserve, the less money that they can lend out. That would lower the market rate. The less money they have to keep in reserve, the more money they can lend out. That puts more money in the economy. Open market operations, if they are buying back securities, they get the securities, the money goes into the market, that increases the money supply. If they're selling securities, people are buying the securities, they get the securities, the Federal Reserve and the United States government gets the money, that decreases the money supply. Discount rate, if the discount rate is high, you'll be able to borrow money from the Fed, so that's less money for them to lend out. That lowers the money supply. If the interest rate is really low, they can borrow that money for almost nothing, lend that money out, that increases the money supply. Okay, I'd be familiar with those three. I've laid them out for you pretty well. Reserve requirement, the percentage of checking and savings that have to be kept in the bank. Open market operations, buying and selling of securities. Discount rate, the interest rate that's charged by the Fed, just we talked about. Okay, a few more things about this chapter. Kind of quickly. Commercial banks and credit unions. Now all of us know what a bank is. Origin is a bank. Regions is a bank. More banks. Chase is a bank. Credit unions. Washington Valley Federal Credit Union. Credit unions. What's the difference between a bank and a credit union? Okay. A bank is what do they both do? They both take in deposits. They both take in for checking. They both make loans. So if you went into a bank or a credit union and I took all the signs down and you couldn't see, you'd be hard pressed to tell whether it was a bank or a credit union because they both do a lot of the same thing. So what's the difference? A bank is a for-profit. Did I put that in here? No, I don't think I did, so I'll say it to you. A bank is a commercial bank, or a bank is a for-profit institution. They are making a profit for whom? Owners. Profits are for owners. Okay? They're making a profit for the owners. A credit union is a non-profit, member-owned financial institution. That's the difference. A commercial bank is for-profit. A credit union is a non-profit, member-owned. Now, that being the case, which one probably should you be able, if you were going to like invest or you were going to do things like, which one should be able to give you maybe the slightly better rate? Probably that credit union, because there's not profit that's leaving the credit union. The money that that credit union makes goes back in either decreasing rates or providing additional services for its members. So I'd be familiar with a commercial bank, I'd be familiar with the credit union. Okay, two other terms, financial terms, I want you to be familiar with. What is the more common term for a demand deposit? Anybody know? A demand deposit. We don't call it a demand deposit, we call it a checking account. Just be familiar that in financial terms, a checking account is known as a demand deposit. How about a time deposit? What do you know that as? Savings. A savings account. Because why is it a demand deposit? Because basically, as long as they have that money in the bank, as long as that money that is in their bank, that's in your account, you can demand it anytime you want to. A time deposit means you primarily leave that money in there for a period of time. So I'd be familiar with a demand deposit, I'd be familiar with a time deposit. The last thing that I want you to be familiar with, and I think we're about all familiar with in this chapter, is you'll see a lot of times if you walk into a bank, you'll see a sign up there that says FDIC. If you walk into a credit union, you'll see a little sign somewhere that says this. I'd say this, if you don't see that sign, you might want to run. And I'll tell you why. What does that mean? Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Federal Deposit Insurance. National Credit Union Association. Here's what these two quasi-governmental bodies do. They insure your deposits in the credit union, or they insure your deposit in the bank. So does that mean that when I put money into the bank, in a savings account or in a checking account, that money is insured in case the bank burns down or they pick up the bank and go to Mexico or something? Yeah, that's what that means. That's what that means. It means that your deposits are insured. Now, a little bit of a side note. You can go to some banks, you know, we talked about investing. Some banks have an investment department. And you could go to a bank and you could buy some stock through their investment department. Okay? Let's say you buy some stock and you come back, maybe a couple months, and you come back and that stock has gone down. You've lost $2,000 on that stock. You go back to the bank, hey, say I want my $2,000, it's insured. No. Deposits are insured, not investments. Remember, when you invest, you're risking. If you invest in stocks, there's a certain amount of risk there. That's not insured. So the FDIC for banks and the NCUA for credit unions, they insure your deposits, not investments within their financial institution. Okay, the last thing, how much? How much? If any of you said $100,000, you would have used to have been right. But right now, and now since about 2014, it's $250,000. So your account is insured up to $250,000. Okay. Like I said, this is a fairly short chapter, but it's an interesting chapter. We need to know, I'm sorry, I don't want to use that word. We need to be familiar, of course, with what money is. It's not a testable item, but in your mind, it's important that you understand what gives this strength. Not a bad idea to understand that. And I think I went through all the other things I want you to be familiar with: the reserve requirement, open market operations, discount rate, commercial bank, credit union, what a time deposit is, what a demand deposit is, and what these things are and the amount that your deposit is insured for. Okay, I think that takes care of chapter 20. We've got one more chapter. Bonus chapter D as in dog, and we will have finished all the chapters leading up to the final. So I won't be gone long. Just a little hairstyling, a few things like that. I'll be back, and we will knock out bonus chapter D. So as I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to clap my hand, loud noise, so Professor Pierce knows that we have finished a chapter. So I am going to do that. All of y'all shout as I clap my hands, and we will be done with chapter 20. Thank you. Be back for that next one.